Hi there, Dawn McVey here with Paper Tray Ink, and I'm excited to be joining you for another episode of Make It Monday. Today we're talking about adding dry embossing over the top of heat embossing for an extra layer of texture and interest to our cards. So let's get started. Okay, so here are a couple of other cards that I've made recently using the same technique that I just wanted to pull out as a reminder. Here I use the Harvest Berries stamp set to heat emboss these leaves on the background, and then I use the Vertical Stripes cover plate to add those debossed lines right over the top of the embossing powder, and it looks so cool. In real life, it's just a great way to add a lot of extra texture and interest to a card. And in the case of today's card, you'll see it's a great technique to use on a one-layer card. For those of you that like to mail your cards and have things nice and flat, obviously I've got a bunch of extra layers here, but you can achieve some really pretty looks just with just by doing this technique on a one-layer card. Here's the same idea, just a different color combo. And here is one other card that I used, the quatrefoil cover plate for the background. Can you see that? And I did it right over the top of the heat embossed sentiment. So it doesn't have to be something that you do, you know, all over the background as I did on these other cards. It also works right over the top of your sentiment. So there are lots of different ways you're going to be able to use this technique. I'm excited to see what you come up with. For today, I've got my Mum's the Word stamp set and some Versamark ink. And I've got several Zing embossing powders here that I'm going to be using. To get started, I'm just going to stamp a couple of the largest mums. This is a technique that I think would be really pretty done with like white embossing powder over the top of maybe a vintage cream card base. And then when you add your debossed pattern over the top, you could make a really rich looking card, I think. I didn't choose to do that today because I don't think it would show up very well on camera for you, but I think that would be a really pretty technique. Okay, so this is apricot embossing powder. And I just use a piece of cardstock to catch my embossing powder that I've folded. It's got kind of a crease down the middle, so when I am done with the embossing powder, I can just pour it right back into the container. And then I kind of whack it over the trash can just to make sure I get any excess off before I use the next color. So I'm going to go ahead and heat this with my heat tool. I'll be right back with you. Okay, so as you can see, we've got kind of a, I don't know if you can see that, but it's a shiny heat embossed. Those images are now shiny and shimmery. So now I'm going to add the medium flower from Mum's the Word. I'm going to just stamp a couple of those. Also in Versamark ink. And I'm going to add one more of the smallest size. Tuck that right in the middle. And now I've switched to rouge embossing powder. You want to do your colors in layers like this so that you can mix in different colors without messing up the first color. And you can see I've got, a little bit of excess here that I'm just going to brush off with a tiny little paintbrush. I did use an embossing buddy on this right before we started, but just in case, it's always nice to have a little paintbrush handy. So now I'm going to heat set this and I'll be back. Okay, so before we go any further, I want to go ahead and add my sentiment because the leaves are the last thing that I want to use to fill in wherever I feel like I need a little extra filler. So if we get the sentiment placed first, then we can just fill in around it as needed with leaves. So this is the Happy Fall sentiment, also from Mum's the Word. And I'm going to add some chestnut embossing powder this time. Grab my brush again. Some of those specks are part of the texture of the cardstock. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is add our leaves, and the embossing powder is appropriately called Leaf, this particular color of green. I like to just add them kind of wherever you feel like you need a little bit of a hole filled. And then, you know, after you've done a few, I go ahead and add the embossing powder so I can see, kind of get a feel for how it's going to look. And then I can see if I want to add any more. I'm going to make sure you get every little spot covered with that embossing powder. I'm going to add just a couple more. Actually, you know what? I'm going to grab the a little bit smaller leaf this time. We'll add our powder. Trying to remember where I just stamped that last one. All right, it's ready for some heat. I'll be right back. Okay, so I have got all the heat embossing done. I added one extra little flower up here just to make it a little less perfectly matched. I didn't want the top and the bottom to be quite so even. So the last step is just to add our dry embossing over the top of the heat embossing. So to do that, I'm going to use the hexagon cover plate. I'm going to position it over the top of my card, and I'm going to use the tan and vanilla mats that Paper Tray sells. I'll put those on the back side. I'll run it through my Vagabond, and I'll be right back with you. And here is the finished look. Dry embossing over heat embossing. It's tons of detail and texture, so much interest in real life. You just want to touch it when you see it. So I think you are going to have a ton of fun with this one. I can't wait to see what you come up with. If you'd like to play along with this week's challenge, be sure to head over to Nicole Hetty's blog, where you can leave a link to your project so we can all see what you came up with. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Dawn McVey with Make It Monday.